The fluorescent lights of Henderson and Associates flickered as I sat at my cramped desk in the corner of the accounting department, staring at the stack of invoices that seemed to multiply every hour. It was 7:30 in the morning on March 15th, and while most people were still having their first cup of coffee, I was already knee-deep in spreadsheets and budget reports. What made this morning different wasn't just another mundane Tuesday in downtown Chicago, but the fact that it was my 28th birthday, and somehow I had convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, things would be different today. The March wind rattled the windows of our 32nd floor office, carrying with it the promise of spring that Chicago winters always seemed reluctant to deliver. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and glanced at the empty cubicle next to mine where Sarah used to sit before she got promoted to senior analyst last month. Her departure had doubled my workload, but according to Mr. Peterson, our department manager, I wasn't quite ready for that level of responsibility yet. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to help us bring you more real stories like this one, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue sharing these incredible journeys of perseverance and triumph. I had been working at Henderson and Associates for 3 years, ever since I graduated from Northwestern with my accounting degree and a head full of dreams about climbing the corporate ladder. What I hadn't expected was how slowly that ladder moved, especially when you're a young woman in a firm dominated by men in their 50s who seem to view ambition in women as something slightly unseemly, like wearing too much perfume to a board meeting. My supervisor, David Peterson, was the epitome of this old-school mentality. At 54, he had been with the company for over 2 decades, and he ran his department like a small kingdom where he was the undisputed ruler and everyone else was there to serve his vision of how things should be done. Peterson wasn't exactly cruel, but he had a way of making you feel small that was almost artistic in its subtlety. He would assign me the most tedious tasks while giving the interesting projects to my male colleagues, even those with less experience. When I suggested more efficient ways to handle our quarterly reports, he would nod politely and then continue doing things exactly as he always had. When I asked about advancement opportunities, he would smile patronizingly and tell me that patience was a virtue, especially for someone so young and eager. The morning sun was struggling to break through the thick cloud cover that seemed permanently stationed over the Chicago skyline when Peterson emerged from his corner office, coffee mug in hand, surveying his domain like a general inspecting his troops. He was wearing his usual navy blue suit with a tie that had probably been fashionable when Reagan was president, and his thinning hair was combed over in a way that fooled absolutely no one but somehow gave him confidence. "Martinez," he called out, using my last name as he always did, never bothering with the courtesy of Ms. or even my first name, Elena. "I need those Morrison account reconciliations on my desk by noon, and make sure you double-check everything. The client is very particular about accuracy." I looked up from my computer screen, where I had already been working on those very reconciliations since I arrived 2 hours earlier. "Actually, Mr. Peterson, I finished those yesterday afternoon. They're already in your email, along with the variance analysis you requested for the Hoffman project." His eyebrows raised slightly, more in annoyance than impressed acknowledgement. "Well, then you can start on the Patterson quarterly review. It's going to need a complete overhaul, and I want it ready for presentation next week." The Patterson account was notoriously complex, involving multiple subsidiaries and international transactions that would take days to sort through properly. It was also the kind of high-profile project that typically went to senior staff members, the kind of assignment that could showcase analytical skills and attention to detail. In other words, it was exactly the type of work I had been hoping to get my hands on for months. "I'd be happy to take that on," I replied, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "I've actually been familiarizing myself with their corporate structure in my spare time, and I have some ideas about how to streamline their reporting process." Peterson paused, his coffee mug halfway to his lips, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. For a moment, I thought he might actually be considering my suggestion, maybe even recognizing that I had taken initiative to learn about accounts beyond my current assignments. Instead, he set his mug down and gave me that familiar patronizing smile that I had come to dread. "Elena," he said, and the use of my first name somehow made what came next feel even worse. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, I really do. But the Patterson account requires a certain level of experience and judgment that comes with time. Why don't you focus on what you do best, the data entry and basic reconciliations? Leave the strategic thinking to those of us who have earned that responsibility." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were shouted or delivered with obvious malice, but because they were said so casually, so matter-of-factly, as if my ambitions were simply a cute misunderstanding that needed to be gently corrected. Around us, the office continued its morning routine. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the copy machine humming in the distance, but I felt like everything had gone silent except for the sound of my dreams deflating. I wanted to argue, to point out that I had a higher GPA than most of my colleagues, that I had consistently exceeded performance targets, that I had voluntarily taken on additional training in advanced financial analysis. Instead, I simply nodded and turned back to my computer, swallowing the frustration that had become as familiar as my morning coffee. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine tasks and simmering resentment. I processed expense reports, updated client files, and answered emails with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had given up trying to find meaning in their daily work. My colleagues, most of whom were decent people trapped in the same soul-crushing routine, offered the usual small talk about weekend plans and weather complaints, but I found it hard to engage when all I could think about was Peterson's dismissive tone and the way he had reduced 3 years of hard work to data entry and basic reconciliations. Around 11:30, just as I was contemplating whether it would be worth updating my resume during lunch break, my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Marcus. "Happy birthday, superstar. Ready for dinner tonight? I made reservations at that Italian place you love." The reminder that it was my birthday made everything feel slightly more absurd. Here I was, another year older, supposedly another year wiser, and yet I felt more stuck than ever. I was about to reply when Peterson's voice cut through the office chatter like a knife through butter. "Attention everyone," he announced, standing in the center of the cubicle farm with the air of someone about to deliver important news. "I wanted to let you all know that we have a new senior analyst joining our team next week. Please welcome James Morrison, yes, relation to our Morrison account client, who will be taking over several of our key accounts and helping to modernize our reporting processes." The irony wasn't lost on me that the modernizing Peterson had dismissed when I suggested it was suddenly brilliant when it came attached to a fresh-faced MBA with the right last name and presumably the right gender. I watched as my colleagues applauded politely, some more enthusiastically than others, and I wondered if any of them noticed how I had gone rigid in my chair. "James comes to us with extensive experience in corporate finance," Peterson continued, "and I'm sure he'll bring fresh perspectives to our department. I'll be working closely with him to ensure he's up to speed on all our major accounts, including the Patterson Quarterly Review." And there it was, the final insult. The project he had deemed too complex for my supposedly inadequate experience was being handed to someone who hadn't even started yet, someone whose primary qualification seemed to be sharing a surname with one of our biggest clients. I felt my hands clench into fists under my desk and had to consciously force myself to breathe normally. The applause died down, and Peterson began to disperse back toward his office when he paused next to my cubicle. "Oh, Elena," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I almost forgot. Susan in HR mentioned it was someone's birthday today." He pulled out a white ceramic mug with text printed in bold black letters and set it on my desk with the casual air of someone bestowing a great gift. I stared at the mug, reading the words printed across its surface. "Know your place." Below that, in smaller text, "It's behind the coffee machine." The office seemed to freeze around us. I could hear the soft intake of breath from Jenny at the cubicle across from mine, the sudden stop of typing from Mike's workstation, the way conversations seemed to pause mid-sentence as people processed what they were seeing. Peterson stood there with a self-satisfied smile, apparently oblivious to the collective discomfort he had just created, or perhaps fully aware and enjoying it. "I thought it was fitting," he said with a chuckle. "You always know where everything is in the break room, and you make the best coffee. It's nice when people understand their strengths, don't you think?" I picked up the mug, turning it slowly in my hands, feeling its weight and considering the multiple ways it could be put to immediate use, none of which involved drinking coffee. The silence stretched on, becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second, and I could feel the eyes of my colleagues on me, waiting to see how I would respond to this public humiliation disguised as a birthday gift. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I heard myself say, my voice sounding strangely calm even to my own ears. "This is certainly memorable." He nodded, apparently satisfied with my response, and continued on his way to his office, leaving me sitting there with the offensive mug and the curious stares of my coworkers. Jenny leaned over the partition between our cubicles, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena, that was completely inappropriate. You should report this to HR immediately." I appreciated her support, but I also knew the reality of our workplace politics. Peterson was untouchable, a senior manager with decades of experience and close relationships with the company's partners. I was a junior employee with no real leverage and a stack of student loans that made job security more important than personal dignity, at least in theory. It's fine, I lied, setting the mug aside and returning to my computer screen. Just Peterson being Peterson. But it wasn't fine, and the mug sat on my desk like a monument to everything wrong with my professional life. Every time I glanced at it, I felt a fresh wave of anger mixed with humiliation. The casual cruelty of it was almost breathtaking, to take someone's birthday, a day that should represent hope and possibility, and use it as an opportunity to remind them of their perceived place in the hierarchy. Lunch came and went, but I found myself too angry to eat. Instead, I walked the streets of downtown Chicago, letting the cold March air clear my head and trying to figure out what to do next. The city was bustling with the usual midday energy. Business people hurrying between meetings, tourists taking photos of the architecture, street vendors calling out their specials. But I felt disconnected from all of it, like I was watching life happen through glass. I found myself standing in front of the Tribune Tower, looking up at its Gothic revival architecture and thinking about ambition, about dreams deferred, about the gap between who we want to be and who the world tells us we're allowed to become. My phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. Hope work isn't being too brutal on your birthday. Remember, dinner at 7. And I have news that might cheer you up. The afternoon dragged by with excruciating slowness. Every mundane task felt amplified by the presence of that mug, which had become a focal point for 3 years of accumulated frustration. I processed invoices while thinking about all the strategic recommendations I had made that were ignored. I updated spreadsheets while remembering every time I had been passed over for projects that went to less qualified male colleagues. I answered emails while contemplating the systematic way my ambitions had been minimized and dismissed. Around 4 o'clock, Peterson emerged from his office again, this time heading toward the conference room with a stack of files and his laptop. As he passed my desk, he paused and nodded toward the mug, which I had deliberately left in plain sight. I see you're not using your birthday gift, he said with that same condescending smile. I hope you're not taking it the wrong way. It was meant to be lighthearted, you know. Sometimes people are too sensitive about these things. The gaslighting was almost as infuriating as the original insult. Here he was, trying to reframe his deliberate humiliation as harmless fun and suggesting that any offense taken was my fault for being overly sensitive. It was a masterclass in workplace manipulation, and I recognized it for exactly what it was. Oh, I'm saving it for the right moment, I replied, meeting his eyes directly. I want to make sure I use it appropriately. Something in my tone must have registered because his smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly and continued toward the conference room. I watched him go, and for the first time all day, I felt a small spark of something that wasn't anger or frustration. It might have been determination, or maybe just the first stirring of a plan I hadn't fully formed yet. The day finally limped to its conclusion at 6 o'clock, and I gathered my things with the weary relief of someone escaping from prison. The mug went into my purse, not because I wanted to keep it, but because I had a feeling it might prove useful in ways Peterson hadn't intended. As I waited for the elevator, Jenny approached me with a concerned expression. Are you okay? She asked quietly. That whole thing today was really messed up. I've been thinking about it all afternoon, and I just can't believe he thought that was appropriate. I appreciated her concern, and it reminded me that not everyone at Henderson and Associates was complicit in the toxic culture Peterson had created. There were good people here, people who recognized right from wrong, even if they didn't always feel empowered to speak up about it. I'm okay, I told her, and for the first time that day, I meant it. Actually, I think I might be better than okay. The restaurant Marcus had chosen was a small Italian place in Lincoln Park, the kind of neighborhood gem that survived on quality food and word-of-mouth recommendations rather than flashy marketing. The warm lighting and rich aromas of garlic and herbs created a welcome contrast to the sterile corporate environment I had just escaped. Marcus was already seated at our usual table, grinning broadly and practically vibrating with excitement. Happy birthday, my incredibly talented and underappreciated friend, he said, standing to give me a hug that lasted just long enough to remind me that there were people in my life who valued me for who I was rather than tolerating me for what I could do for them. Marcus had been my closest friend since college, where we had bonded over late-night study sessions and a shared determination to prove that first-generation college students could succeed in fields that seemed designed to exclude us. He had gone into marketing while I chose accounting, but we had maintained our friendship through career changes, relationship drama, and all the challenges of navigating professional life in our 20s. So, I said, settling into my chair and immediately feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. What's this news you mentioned? Please tell me it's good because I've had about all the surprises I can handle for one day. His grin widened, and he leaned forward like he was about to share state secrets. Okay, you know how I've been working on that campaign for Meridian Financial? The one that's been consuming my life for the past 6 months. I nodded. Marcus worked for a mid-sized marketing firm, and the Meridian Financial account was their biggest client, a regional banking company that was expanding into new markets. He had been project manager on their rebranding campaign, and from what he had told me, it was the kind of high-profile assignment that could make or break a career. Well, he continued, barely able to contain his excitement. They loved the campaign so much that they're not just renewing their contract, they're expanding it. And they specifically requested that I lead the team for their new initiative. Elena, they're offering me a partnership track position with a salary that's almost double what I'm making now. I felt a genuine surge of happiness for my friend, mixed with just a tiny pang of envy that I tried to suppress. Marcus deserved this success. He was brilliant, hardworking, and had the kind of creative vision that made complex problems seem simple. If anyone had earned a breakthrough like this, it was him. That's incredible, I said, raising my water glass in a toast. I'm so proud of you. You've worked so hard for this, and it's amazing to see it paying off. But wait, he said, holding up his hand. There's more. You know how Meridian is expanding into new markets? Well, part of that expansion includes opening a Chicago office, and they're going to need a full accounting department to handle their Midwest operations. They want someone with experience in corporate finance, someone who understands the regulatory environment, someone who can build a department from the ground up. I felt my heart start to beat faster, but I didn't want to get my hopes up. The disappointments of the day had made me cautious about reading too much into possibilities. That sounds like a great opportunity for someone, I said carefully. Elena, Marcus said, leaning forward and speaking with the intensity of someone delivering life-changing news. I told them about you. I showed them your work on those efficiency reports you did for Henderson and Associates, the ones Peterson ignored. I may have mentioned how you've been systematically undervalued at your current job, and how any smart company would be lucky to have someone with your skills and work ethic. The room seemed to tilt slightly around me. Marcus, what are you saying? I'm saying they want to interview you. Next week. For a senior financial analyst position with a starting salary that's 30% more than you're making now, plus equity options, plus the opportunity to build something from scratch instead of being stuck in someone else's system. I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. After 3 years of being told I wasn't ready for advancement, wasn't experienced enough for important projects, wasn't quite what they were looking for, here was someone offering me exactly the kind of opportunity one had been dreaming about. Are you serious? I managed to ask. Dead serious. Elena, these people are smart and they recognize talent when they see it. They're not interested in maintaining some outdated hierarchy or protecting fragile egos. They want results, and they're willing to pay for the right person to deliver them. I felt tears threatening at the corners of my eyes, but they weren't tears of frustration or anger like I had been fighting all day. These were tears of relief, of possibility, of the sudden realization that maybe I hadn't been wrong about my abilities after all. Maybe I had just been in the wrong place. When is the interview? I asked. Thursday morning. I already sent them your resume. Hope you don't mind. And they were impressed enough to want to meet you immediately. Elena, I think this could be it. I think this could be your chance to show what you can really do. We spent the rest of dinner talking about the opportunity, about what the interview might entail, about the possibility of working for a company that actually valued innovation and results over office politics and gender bias. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about my career prospects instead of just resigned to grinding through each day. As we walked back to the parking garage, Chicago's skyline glittering around us in the clear night air, I found myself thinking about Peterson's mug and the casual cruelty of his "Know Your Place" message. What he hadn't realized was that I did know my place. It just wasn't where he thought it should be. Marcus, I said as we reached my car, I need to ask you for one more favor. Anything, he replied without hesitation. If this interview goes well, if I get this job, would you be willing to attend a small celebration? Maybe at Henderson and Associates? I have a feeling it's going to be the kind of party Peterson will remember for a long time. He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and delight. Elena Martinez, are you planning some kind of revenge? Not revenge, I corrected. Justice. There's a difference. The next 2 days passed in a blur of interview preparation and barely contained anticipation. I researched Meridian Financial exhaustively, practiced answers to potential questions, and even bought a new suit that made me feel confident and professional. The interview itself was everything I had hoped for. A panel of executives who asked thoughtful questions, listened to my answers, and seemed genuinely interested in my ideas for building their accounting department. The contrast with my daily experience at Henderson and Associates was stark. These were people who wanted to know about my vision for modernizing financial reporting, my thoughts on regulatory compliance, my ideas for creating efficient workflows. No one questioned whether I was ready for responsibility or suggested that my role should be limited to data entry and coffee preparation. Thursday afternoon, as I sat at my desk trying to focus on routine tasks while my mind raced with possibilities, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Elena Martinez? The voice was professional but warm. This is Catherine Wells from Meridian Financial. Do you have a few minutes to talk? My heart started racing, but I tried to keep my voice steady. Of course, Ms. Wells. Thank you for calling. I wanted to let you know that we were extremely impressed with your interview yesterday. Your vision for our accounting department aligns perfectly with our goals for expansion, and your experience with process optimization is exactly what we're looking for. We'd like to offer you the position of Senior Financial Analyst with a starting salary of $85,000, plus equity participation and full benefits. Are you interested? I had to grip the phone tighter to keep from dropping it. $85,000 was indeed 30% more than my current salary, but more importantly, it represented recognition of my actual worth rather than Peterson's diminished version of my capabilities. I'm very interested, I managed to say. When would you need an answer? Well, we're eager to get started, so ideally we'd like to have you begin in 2 weeks. Would that work with your current obligations? 2 weeks' notice was standard, and I found myself nodding even though she couldn't see me. That would work perfectly. Yes, I accept your offer. Wonderful. I'll have our HR department send you the formal offer letter and all the necessary paperwork. Welcome to Meridian Financial, Elena. We're excited to have you on board. After I hung up, I sat at my desk in a daze, trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 5 minutes, my entire professional future had been transformed. I was going from junior analyst stuck in routine tasks to senior analyst building a department from scratch. I was going from being told to know my place to being given the opportunity to define it myself. The irony wasn't lost on me that this breakthrough had come just 2 days after Peterson's insulting birthday gift. His attempt to diminish me had coincided almost perfectly with my opportunity to transcend everything he represented. It felt like the universe had a sense of humor, or maybe just a sense of justice. I spent the rest of Thursday afternoon in a state of barely suppressed euphoria, processing invoices and updating files while planning my resignation and thinking about how to make my departure as memorable as Peterson's gift had been insulting. The mug still sat on my desk, and every time I looked at it, I felt a little spark of anticipation for what was to come. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Chicago weather for mid-March, but I felt like I was walking on sunshine as I made my way through the lobby of Henderson and Associates. I had spent Thursday evening crafting my resignation letter, making sure it was professional but clear about my reasons for leaving. More importantly, I had spent time planning what Marcus and I had started calling the celebration. The morning routine unfolded as usual, Peterson arriving with his coffee and his sense of self-importance, colleagues settling into their cubicles with resigned efficiency, phones beginning to ring with the day's first crises. I went through the motions of checking email and organizing my tasks, but my mind was focused on the envelope in my purse that contained my resignation letter and the plan I was about to set in motion. Around 10:30, I saw Peterson emerge from his office with a stack of files, heading toward the copy machine. This was my moment. I pulled out my phone and sent Marcus a quick text. It's time. See you in 15 minutes. I stood up and walked over to Peterson's station by the copier, carrying the offensive mug in both hands like I was presenting him with a ceremonial gift. Several colleagues looked up from their work, perhaps sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the office. I wanted to thank you for the birthday gift you gave me earlier this week. He looked up from the copying machine, seeming slightly puzzled by my formal tone and the attention we were drawing from nearby cubicles. Oh yes, the mug. I hope you've been getting good use out of it. Actually, I have been thinking about it quite a lot, I replied, holding the mug up so its message was visible to anyone who cared to look. Your message about knowing one's place really resonated with me. It made me do some serious reflection about where I belong and what I'm worth. A few more heads turned in our direction, and I could see Peterson beginning to look uncomfortable with the public nature of our conversation. He probably expected me to thank him quietly and return to my desk, maintaining the professional decorum that had allowed his casual cruelty to go unchallenged for so long. I realized you were absolutely right, I continued, speaking loudly enough that most of the office could hear me clearly. I do need to know my place. And my place isn't somewhere I'm told I'm not ready for advancement despite 3 years of exemplary performance. My place isn't somewhere my suggestions for improvement are ignored while the same ideas are praised when they come from male colleagues. My place definitely isn't somewhere my boss thinks it's appropriate to give me a Know Your Place mug for my birthday. The office had gone completely quiet now, with everyone either staring openly or pretending to work while straining to hear every word. Peterson's face was cycling through several different shades of red, and he kept glancing around as if looking for an escape route from this unexpected confrontation. "Elena," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I think you're overreacting to what was obviously meant as harmless office humor. Perhaps we should discuss this privately in my office." "Oh, but I think this conversation is exactly where it needs to be," I replied sweetly. "After all, you gave me this gift publicly, in front of all my colleagues. It seems only fair that I thank you publicly as well." Just then, the elevator doors opened and Marcus stepped out, looking professional in his best suit and carrying a small gift bag. He had perfect timing, as always, and he approached our group with a confident smile that suggested he belonged exactly where he was. "Elena," he called out cheerfully, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. I brought you a little something to celebrate your news." Peterson looked back and forth between Marcus and me, clearly confused about who this stranger was and what news he was referring to. The rest of the office was watching with the kind of fascination usually reserved for reality television or traffic accidents. "Not interrupting at all," I assured Marcus. "I was just thanking Mr. Peterson for helping me understand my worth. Marcus, I'd like you to meet my soon-to-be former supervisor, David Peterson." "Mr. Peterson, this is Marcus Rivera, senior partner at Rivera Marketing Group." Marcus extended his hand with professional courtesy, and Peterson shook it automatically while still trying to process what I had just said about being his soon-to-be former supervisor. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Peterson," Marcus said with genuine warmth. "I've heard so much about you from Elena. You should be very proud of the work she's done here. In fact, her reputation for excellence is exactly why Meridian Financial was so eager to recruit her for their new senior analyst position." The color drained from Peterson's face as the implications of Marcus's words sank in. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he realized that I wasn't just making empty threats or having an emotional breakdown. I was announcing my departure for a better opportunity, and doing it in the most public way possible. "Elena," Peterson said, his voice now strained with the effort of maintaining professional composure, "perhaps we should discuss your future with the company. I'm sure we can work out any concerns you might have about your role here." It was fascinating to watch how quickly his tune changed once he realized I had alternatives. The patronizing dismissal was gone, replaced by the kind of desperate backpedaling that happens when someone realizes they're about to lose something valuable. Too little, too late, but entertaining nonetheless. "That's very kind of you to offer," I said, pulling my resignation letter from my purse. "But I've already made my decision. This is my formal 2 weeks' notice. My last day will be next Friday." I handed him the envelope, and he took it with hands that were visibly trembling slightly. Around us, the office buzzed with barely contained excitement as people pretended to return to their work while obviously listening to every word of this unprecedented drama. "And Marcus," I continued, turning to my friend, "what did you bring me?" He grinned and handed me the gift bag with a flourish. "Just a little something to commemorate this special moment." I opened the bag and pulled out a beautiful ceramic mug, deep blue with elegant silver lettering that read, "Know Your Worth." Below that, in smaller text, "And never settle for less." The contrast with Peterson's insulting gift was immediately apparent to everyone watching, and I heard a few barely suppressed chuckles from my colleagues. Jenny actually started applauding, and within seconds, most of the office had joined in. It was surreal and wonderful and exactly the kind of moment I had dreamed about during all those frustrated lunch breaks. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, holding up both mugs so everyone could see the difference between them. "I think this one better represents my actual place in the professional world." Peterson was standing there looking like he had swallowed something extremely unpleasant, clutching my resignation letter and probably calculating how much it was going to cost to replace me and train someone new on all the accounts I had been managing. The Patterson quarterly review alone was going to be a nightmare for him to handle without my background work. I want to take a moment to thank everyone who has been supportive during my time here, I announced to the office at large. Jenny, Mike, Sandra, and the rest of you, you've made this job bearable even when the management made it challenging. I hope we'll stay in touch, and I want you all to know that there are companies out there that will value your contributions appropriately. More applause, some genuine smiles, and a few knowing looks that suggested my colleagues had experienced their own frustrations with Peterson's management style. It felt good to know that I wasn't leaving them with false hope, but with a reminder that better opportunities existed for people willing to pursue them. As for you, Mr. Peterson, I said, turning back to my former supervisor, I want to thank you for giving me exactly the motivation I needed to recognize my worth and seek out opportunities that match it. Without your casual dismissal of my abilities and your charming birthday gift, I might have stayed here much longer, never realizing how much better things could be. I set his offensive mug on the counter next to the copy machine and picked up my new one, taking a symbolic sip from it while maintaining eye contact with him. The gesture was probably a bit theatrical, but after 3 years of swallowing my pride and accepting his diminished view of my capabilities, a little drama felt entirely appropriate. I'll spend the next 2 weeks transitioning my projects and training whoever you designate to take over my accounts, I concluded. I want to make sure Henderson and Associates suffers as little disruption as possible from my departure, despite the short notice. Peterson finally managed to find his voice, though it came out strained and uncertain. Elena, I hope you'll reconsider this decision. You're a valuable member of our team, and I'd hate to see you make a mistake based on a misunderstanding. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, faced with the consequences of his behavior, he was trying to reframe my departure as a misunderstanding and a mistake, rather than acknowledging any wrongdoing on his part. It was a perfect example of the kind of gaslighting that had made working for him so frustrating. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Peterson, I replied calmly. I understand perfectly. You gave me a mug telling me to know my place, and I'm doing exactly that. My place is somewhere I'm valued, respected, and given opportunities to grow. My place is somewhere my birthday isn't used as an occasion for public humiliation disguised as humor. Marcus stepped forward, extending his business card to Peterson with professional courtesy. Mr. Peterson, if you're ever interested in discussing how modern companies approach employee retention and talent development, I'd be happy to share some insights from our work with forward-thinking organizations. It was a perfectly polite way of suggesting that Peterson's management style was outdated and counterproductive. And from the expression on Peterson's face, the message was received loud and clear. He took the card automatically, probably too shocked to refuse it. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of congratulations from colleagues, whispered conversations about Peterson's behavior, and speculation about how the department would function without me. I spent most of my time fielding questions about my new job and assuring people that yes, there really were companies out there that treated employees better than Henderson and Associates. By lunchtime, the story had spread throughout the entire office, and I found myself being approached by people from other departments who wanted to hear firsthand about my dramatic resignation and offer their congratulations. It was gratifying to discover how many of my colleagues had been frustrated by the company's culture, but hadn't felt empowered to speak up about it. The most satisfying moment came around 2 o'clock, when I overheard Peterson on a phone call with someone from HR, explaining that he was going to need to fast-track the hiring process for my replacement and might need to bring in temporary contractors to handle the workload until someone permanent could be found. The stress in his voice was palpable, and I couldn't help but feel that it was a small taste of the anxiety he had caused me over the past 3 years. My last 2 weeks at Henderson and Associates were unlike any I had experienced during my entire tenure there. Suddenly, Peterson was treating me with something approaching respect, asking for my input on transitional procedures and actually listening to my suggestions about how to handle my accounts. It was remarkable how quickly someone's attitude could change when they realized they were about to lose a valuable employee and face the consequences of their poor management. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was finally receiving the kind of professional treatment I had been seeking for years, but only because I was leaving. It was a perfect illustration of how some managers only recognize value when they're about to lose it, and how respect often comes too late to matter. During those final days, several colleagues approached me privately to share their own stories of frustration with Peterson's management style. Jenny told me about suggestions she had made that were ignored until a male colleague proposed the same ideas months later. Mike confided that he had been passed over for promotions despite consistently exceeding his targets. Sandra revealed that she had been looking for other opportunities for months but hadn't had the courage to actually leave. These conversations reinforced my belief that I wasn't the problem, the workplace culture was. Peterson's behavior toward me wasn't an isolated incident but part of a pattern of undermining employees, particularly women, and maintaining control through systematic dismissal of their contributions and ambitions. On my final Friday, I cleaned out my desk methodically, packing 3 years' worth of personal items and professional materials into a single cardboard box. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Everything that had seemed so permanent and important just 2 weeks ago now fit into a container I could carry with one hand. Peterson approached my cubicle around 4 o'clock, looking uncomfortable and holding what appeared to be a prepared speech in his mind. "Elena, I wanted to wish you well in your new position. I hope there are no hard feelings about anything that happened here." It was a classic non-apology, the kind that acknowledged nothing while attempting to clear his conscience and protect him from potential future consequences. I could have pointed out that giving someone a know-your-place mug for their birthday wasn't the kind of thing that could be dismissed as a simple misunderstanding. I could have detailed all the ways his management style had stifled my professional growth and undermined my confidence. Instead, I chose to take the high road. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I learned a lot during my time here, and I'm grateful for the experience. It taught me exactly what kind of workplace culture I want to be part of, and what kind I want to avoid in the future." He nodded, perhaps sensing the subtext in my words but choosing not to engage with it. "Well, good luck with everything. I'm sure you'll do fine in your new role." As he walked away, I felt a mixture of relief and vindication. The passive-aggressive power dynamics that had defined our relationship for 3 years were finally over, and I was walking away not as a victim but as someone who had recognized her worth and acted accordingly. My colleagues threw me an impromptu farewell gathering in the break room, complete with cake and genuine expressions of support for my future endeavors. Even people I barely knew stopped by to congratulate me and express their admiration for how I had handled my departure. It was heartwarming to realize that my resignation had inspired others to think more critically about their own career situations and workplace treatment. As I walked out of Henderson and Associates for the last time, carrying my cardboard box and my new mug, I felt lighter than I had in months. The Chicago skyline stretched out before me, full of possibility and promise, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was walking toward something rather than away from it. My first day at Meridian Financial was everything I had hoped it would be and more. The office was modern and bright, with an open floor plan that encouraged collaboration rather than hierarchy. My new colleagues welcomed me warmly and seemed genuinely excited about the fresh perspectives I would bring to their accounting department. The contrast with my old workplace was immediately apparent. During my first team meeting, when I suggested a more efficient approach to monthly reconciliations, the response wasn't dismissive skepticism but engaged questions about implementation and timeline. When I proposed creating automated reporting tools to reduce manual data entry, the reaction wasn't patronizing patience but enthusiastic support for innovation. Most importantly, my new supervisor, Catherine Wells, treated me as a professional equal whose ideas and expertise were valued. She didn't question whether I was ready for responsibility or suggest that my role should be limited to basic tasks. Instead, she challenged me to think strategically about building the department and gave me the authority to implement my vision. 3 months into my new job, I received an unexpected email from Jenny at Henderson and Associates. She had finally worked up the courage to leave and had accepted a position at a marketing firm where her creative ideas were being embraced rather than ignored. Her email included a photo of her new office and a message that made me smile. "Thank you for showing us all that we deserve better. Your resignation was the catalyst I needed to start valuing myself appropriately." Over the following weeks, I heard similar stories from other former colleagues who had been inspired by my departure to seek better opportunities. Mike had been recruited by a financial consulting firm that appreciated his analytical skills. Sandra had started her own bookkeeping business and was thriving as an entrepreneur. It seemed that my public resignation had created a ripple effect, encouraging others to recognize their own worth and pursue situations where it would be appropriately valued. 6 months after leaving Henderson and Associates, I ran into Peterson at a professional networking event downtown. He looked older and more stressed than I remembered, and when he approached me, his demeanor was notably different from our previous interactions. "Elena," he said, extending his hand with what appeared to be genuine warmth. It's good to see you. I heard you're doing well at Meridian. I shook his hand politely, curious about where this conversation might lead. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Yes, I'm very happy with my new position. How are things at Henderson and Associates? His smile faltered slightly. Well, we've had some challenges since you left. The Patterson account has been particularly difficult to manage, and we've had some turnover in the department. I wanted you to know that we really did value your contributions, even if that wasn't always clear at the time. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get from him, and I appreciated the acknowledgement, even if it came too late to change anything. I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Peterson. I hope the department is able to find its footing with the new team. Actually, he said, looking slightly embarrassed, I was wondering if you might be interested in consulting with us on some of our more complex accounts. We'd be willing to pay your standard consulting rate, of course. The irony was almost too perfect to be believed. The man who had told me I wasn't ready for strategic thinking was now asking me to consult on the very accounts he had deemed too complex for my capabilities. The woman he had tried to keep in her place was now successful enough that he needed her expertise to solve problems his current team couldn't handle. That's a very flattering offer, I replied diplomatically. But my current position keeps me quite busy. I'm building something new at Meridian, and that's where my focus needs to be right now. He nodded, looking disappointed but not entirely surprised. Of course, I understand. Well, if your situation ever changes, please keep us in mind. As I watched him walk away, I felt a profound sense of closure. The dynamic between us had been completely transformed. He was now the one seeking my approval and expertise, while I had the luxury of declining his request. It was a perfect illustration of how much can change when someone refuses to accept limitations that others try to impose on them. A year after my resignation, Meridian Financial promoted me to Senior Manager of Financial Operations, making me responsible for overseeing accounting departments in 3 different cities. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, equity participation, and the kind of professional recognition I had been seeking throughout my career. When I announced the promotion on my LinkedIn profile, I included a photo of myself in my new office, holding the blue mug Marcus had given me with its message about knowing your worth. The post received hundreds of congratulations from colleagues, friends, and even some people I didn't know who had heard about my story through professional networks. One comment particularly stood out, from a young woman who wrote, "Thank you for sharing your story about standing up for yourself in the workplace. I've been dealing with a similar situation at my job, and reading about your experience gave me the courage to start looking for better opportunities. I have an interview next week at a company that actually values what I bring to the table." That comment reminded me why sharing our stories of professional growth and self-advocacy matters. Every time someone refuses to accept being undervalued, they create space for others to do the same. Every time someone walks away from a toxic situation toward something better, they demonstrate that alternatives exist for people willing to pursue them. The offensive mug Peterson had given me was long gone, thrown away on my last day at Henderson and Associates, but its impact had been lasting in ways he never intended. Instead of keeping me in my place, it had catalyzed my recognition of my actual worth and my determination to find a workplace that would acknowledge it appropriately. As I sat in my new office, looking out at the Chicago skyline and reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, I thought about all the factors that had contributed to my professional transformation. There was Marcus's friendship and advocacy, which had opened doors I didn't even know existed. There was my own willingness to recognize when a situation wasn't serving me and take action to change it. There was the support of colleagues who had encouraged me to value myself appropriately. But perhaps most importantly, there was Peterson's unconscious gift of clarity. His know your place message had forced me to confront the gap between how I was being treated and how I deserved to be treated. His casual cruelty had crystallized years of accumulated frustration into a moment of decisive action. Sometimes the people who try to diminish us end up providing exactly the motivation we need to transcend their limited vision of our capabilities. Sometimes the worst advice we receive becomes the catalyst for the best decisions we make. Sometimes knowing your place means refusing to stay in a place that doesn't recognize your worth. Today, when young professionals ask me for career advice, I always tell them the same thing. Never let anyone else define your worth or limit your ambitions based on their own insecurities or biases. Know your value, seek out environments where that value is recognized and rewarded, and never be afraid to walk away from situations that diminish you rather than elevate you. The most important lesson I learned from my experience at Henderson and Associates wasn't about accounting procedures or corporate finance. It was about the power of self-advocacy and the importance of refusing to accept treatment that falls short of what you deserve. It was about understanding that respect isn't something you earn through endless patience and accommodation, but something you command through clear boundaries and high standards. My story isn't unique. Countless professionals, particularly women and minorities, face similar challenges in workplaces that systematically undervalue their contributions. But what gives me hope is seeing how attitudes are slowly changing, how younger workers are increasingly unwilling to tolerate toxic management styles, and how companies are beginning to recognize that retaining talent requires treating people with dignity and respect. The business world is gradually learning that diversity of thought and experience leads to better outcomes, that inclusive environments are more productive than hierarchical ones, and that the cost of replacing good employees far exceeds the cost of treating them appropriately in the first place. Change is happening, sometimes slowly, but it's happening nonetheless. For anyone currently facing a situation similar to what I experienced at Henderson & Associates, remember that you have more power than you might realize. Your skills, knowledge, and work ethic have value in the marketplace, and there are organizations out there that will recognize and reward that value appropriately. Don't let anyone convince you that their diminished view of your capabilities represents reality. Know your place and make sure it's somewhere that knows your worth.